Adam Schiff played the smartest guy in Washington for 8 long years, right up until a single piece of paper suffocated his famous voice. His clicking pen just stopped dead. For 8 solid years, Schiff had been the slickest talker in any room he entered. Now, that butter-smooth voice caught, thinned out, and died on one single word. He tried to square a piece of paper against the table edge, but his shaking hand simply couldn't keep it straight. Right across the table sat a very quiet man, gripping a black binder. This guy hadn't raised his voice once, all morning long. 2 different houses were printed on that page, and Schiff had sworn, in black and white, that each one was his absolute only home. But that drop came later. First, we got the sermon. Let's be real about who I'm actually looking at here, Senator Adam Schiff declared. That smirk on his face, pure television. He painted his opponent as a small-town Louisiana lawyer, a guy who built his entire career suing to jam prayer into public schools, a man working for a group the courts slapped down dozens of times, who now had the nerve to lecture everyone else about the Constitution. You are no constitutional scholar, Mr. Speaker. You are a televangelist who just happens to carry a law license. Laughter rolled through the rows right behind the senator. He intentionally let it breathe. Then, he leaned dead into the mic. And the voters who sent you here? Schiff pushed on. The ones still claiming the last election was rigged. The ones who think a nation of 300 million should take orders from one single church in Shreveport. They deserve the truth, too. So, here is the real question Americans are asking today. He pulled off that highly practiced pivot, turning right to the cameras. Why is a guy, walking on a Christian nationalist leash, allowed anywhere near the nation's top secrets? Mike Johnson didn't fire back immediately. That room was packed before the sun even came up. Activists froze in line just to grab a seat, and plenty of them showed up specifically to watch a speaker get shredded. The press section was totally jammed. Laptops open, with half the reporters already sitting on a finished story headline, included just waiting to plug in the final quotes. Schiff strolled in with the swagger of a guy who already owned the room. And why not? He had won this exact room more times than anybody could track. He had legally buried way sharper operators than the guy sitting across from him. He knew it, and he wanted every single soul watching to know that he knew it. Johnson sat perfectly frozen at the center of the dais. That black binder sat closed in front of him, hands neatly resting on top. No smile, no frown. He just wore the face of a guy who had sat through way longer opening acts in courtrooms that actually mattered. When he finally opened his mouth, the whole room had to lean forward to hear it. Senator, you've talked a whole lot about honesty over the past 4 minutes. I think I'll take you up on that. He popped open the binder to the very first tab. He didn't flash the pages for the press. He just read, "The 20th of March 2017, you step up to a microphone, and you tell the American public, and I'm quoting you directly right here, that the evidence of collusion is, your exact words, in plain sight. Not hidden away, not classified, in plain sight." Johnson locked eyes. Do you recall saying that? Schiff's smirk still had a little armor on it. His brain started doing the math. I recall being right about a massive amount of things that this body completely ignored. It is a very simple question. Johnson's volume stayed flat, but it got a whole lot sharper. Did you tell this country the evidence was in plain sight? Yes or no? And I back up every word. Thank you. Johnson flipped the page. Then, I'm going to take you at your word. Before we wrap up this hearing, I'm going to show this entire committee everything that was actually in plain sight. The surveillance you greenlit, the vote your own colleagues took against you, and a little piece of paper, near the very back, where you swore under oath that 2 totally different houses, in 2 completely different states, were each your one and only home. He just let that bomb hang in the air. You spent 8 long years calling other guys frauds, Senator. Well, I brought the file on you today. So, let's read it together. For the very first time that morning, the chuckling died out, completely gone. Those activists who froze outside started shifting hard in their chairs. Journalists literally stopped typing their pre-written drafts and started actually watching the show. Reporters have this gut instinct. They feel a narrative flip the same way a sailor feels the wind snap, and this story just aggressively flipped. Schiff's smirk was technically still glued on, but it meant absolutely nothing now. Watching a sitting senator get force-fed his own quotes across a table is a rare sight, and we are barely on page 1 of this binder. Johnson slapped his palm flat on the open tab. It is the classic litigator move when marking an exhibit they plan to beat you with later. Let's kick this off with what you did to a private citizen named Carter Page. For the first time all morning, Adam Schiff reached for the cap of his expensive pen. He clicked it. Once, Carter Page isn't a guy half this room will shed tears over. Johnson kept pushing. He worked for a rival team. He chatted with foreign nationals. That made him incredibly easy prey. And you knew, better than anyone in this town, exactly how to grab an easy target and make a brutal example out of him. He didn't even look down at his notes. Johnson spent almost 20 years as a trial lawyer before jumping into politics. The golden rule he learned? A lawyer staring at his notes has already lost his jury. So, here is the reality. In plain English, for the people watching at home. Back in 2016, the most lethal surveillance machine on the planet was weaponized against a private American citizen. Not a convicted spy, a citizen. 4 separate times, a secret court rubber-stamped a warrant to watch his every move. He stopped. The absolute only sound inside that room was the sharp, tiny click of the senator's pen. The Justice Department's Inspector General went back and read those exact applications, line by line. You know what he found, Senator? People describe that report in plenty of ways, but it all boils down to 17. Johnson dropped that specific number on the table like a brick. 17 massive errors and omissions. 17 separate times that secret court was fed something totally fake, or was deliberately blocked from seeing facts it urgently needed. A federal judge, the top judge of that exact court, wrote that the Bureau had, her exact words, completely misled the court about an American who was never even charged with a crime. He let the dead air sit. When he started talking again, he slowed it way down, speaking right to the living rooms. Think about what that really means for a second. Put yourself in those shoes. The government decides to read your mail, tap your phone calls, track your car, and log everyone you meet 4 times in a row, all based on a warrant that a federal judge would later admit was built on absolute garbage. And at the end of this massive sweep, 0. No charges, no crimes. Just a regular guy with his whole life ripped inside out, solely because he was a useful name at a highly useful moment. Johnson stared right through Schiff. That can happen to a guy in this country, Senator. It happened to him. And the narrative you spun about it, the paper you personally signed your name to, declared that the whole operation was totally clean. He slid out another sheet, but he didn't read it out loud yet. And that story you paraded in front of the cameras for 3 straight years? The document you officially logged into the permanent Congressional record that March? It had a specific title. It was a dossier, a stack of totally unverified gossip, mashed together by a foreign operative and bankrolled through a sketchy chain of lawyers by your political rival's campaign. Opposition research. Senator. Bought and paid for. That is exactly what it was on day 1, and exactly what it stayed after Mueller, after Durham, after every single probe. Johnson's tone turned like ice. You didn't tell America it was just dirt-digging research. You didn't tell them who covered the invoice. You stepped up to a microphone and read it into the permanent U.S. record like a sworn eyewitness had signed it in blood. He slapped the page down. He circled back to that exact number, because that was the brutal detail he wanted the public to remember. He picked it with lethal intent. Schiff was a guy who bragged about his surgical precision, about always getting the grammar right. 17 was the number that turned that exact pride into a weapon against him. And where were you while all this went down? You were the one single guy in America whose actual job was to block this exact type of secret abuse against a normal citizen. That happened on your shift, and instead of shutting it down, you drafted a memo. You leaked it to the press, and you promised America the whole thing was squeaky clean. I do not run the FBI, Mr. Speaker. Schiff's voice snapped right back, heavily defensive. I did not draft those warrant applications. The mistakes you keep parading around belong to the Bureau. You are desperately trying to hang an agency's screw-ups around the neck of a guy who didn't even make them. Wrong! Johnson shot back instantly. I am hanging your very own memo around your neck, Senator. You are absolutely right that you didn't write the warrant, but you read every page of it. You saw exactly what they put in there, and then you walked out in front of 300 million people and promised them it was a clean sweep. The Bureau made the screw-ups, you sold them to the public. That is not their signature on the reassurance paper. It is yours. Johnson calmly flipped to the next page. So here is the kill shot I want the folks at home to remember. You didn't just quietly give it a pass. You hit the national TV circuit for 3 solid years, looked dead into the lens, and told the public that the evidence of a president colluding with a foreign power was sitting right in plain sight. You specifically bragged that you had seen it. He laced his fingers together. Robert Mueller burned 2 years digging for what you claimed was already in plain sight. He came up empty on a criminal conspiracy. John Durham burned 4 more years looking. He came up empty, too. 2 elite prosecutors, working totally opposite angles, and neither one could spot the smoking gun you swore you already had in your pocket. Right there. Schiff finally found his legs. He leaned hard over the desk, and that booming broadcast voice came roaring back, loud and absolute. Mueller documented a massive amount of contacts between that campaign and foreign agents. Dozens. I never once alleged a criminal conspiracy inside a court of law. I stated the conduct was deeply unpatriotic. I stated the country had a right to know the truth, and I was dead right to demand we dig into it. You can sneer at that, Mr. Speaker, but history certainly will not. The counterpunch actually connected. A low rumble of approval washed through his side of the room. First sign of life they had shown all day. A staffer aggressively nodded. For one suspended second, the room remembered exactly who they were dealing with. This guy routinely walked into rooms built to destroy him, and walked out looking 10 feet taller. Johnson didn't rush it. When a hostile witness finally unloads the haymaker he has been winding up, a killer lawyer lets it swing wildly through the air before he counters it. Contacts, Johnson noted quietly. Contacts is absolutely not the word you used, Senator. You didn't tell America there were sketchy contacts worth digging into. You told America the collusion was sitting in plain sight. Those are 2 wildly different sentences, and you, of all people, a veteran prosecutor, know exactly how massive the gap is between those 2 claims. He tapped the paper on the desk. The evidence was in plain sight. You declared. You were 50% right. It just wasn't sitting where you were pointing. Then, Johnson tossed all professional courtesy straight in the trash. Just for a second. You didn't say it might be legit. You didn't say you had a solid hunch worth running down. You said you had physically seen it, and families all over this nation ripped each other apart over the garbage you told them you saw. Neighbors turned on neighbors for years, fighting over a ghost that two special prosecutors hunted for and simply could not find. That crushing silence in the room? That was the exact sound of a man hearing his own toxic garbage march right back across the desk to bite him. In the third row, a reporter who had been typing like a maniac suddenly froze. She read a text on her screen, grabbed her bag, and bailed out the back doors. She was gone for good. Johnson was already pulling the next tab, and while we are discussing things you said that were total fiction, Johnson kept pushing. Let's talk about the guy who knew first. Fall of 2019, Johnson laid it out. A complaint rolls in that sparks the first presidential impeachment in 2 decades. You ran that show. You were the lead prosecutor, the main architect, the face on every TV screen in the country. And you were asked, on live television, one very simple question. Had your committee, your staff, or anyone working under you had any contact with the whistleblower before that complaint officially dropped? Do you remember your response? I recall answering very carefully, as anyone in my position naturally would. Schiff deflected smoothly. You said flat out, no. The very last ounce of polite tone vanished from Johnson's voice, and it was a total lie. Your staff had absolutely been in contact before the complaint hit. You knew the guy who knew first. And you told the whole country you had no clue. Not under the threat of physical torture, not to save a kid's life. You told a pointless, stupid lie on a Tuesday about a nothing detail that would have blown over by Friday, just because you decided the truth was whatever worked best for you in those exact 90 seconds. He slammed both hands flat on the open binder. And realize exactly what that specific lie infected, Senator. That complaint launched an impeachment. An impeachment is the absolute heaviest hammer this House can swing at a sitting president. It is meant to be the one singular process in the entire U.S. government that nobody can ever call a rigged game, because the stakes are way too high for anything less than totally clean hands. And you ran the board. You were the prosecutor, and the whole time you were standing on a pile of facts that you had already told the cameras wasn't real. You grabbed the most serious constitutional tool we have, and you cranked it up with a blatant lie about how it even started. Right there, the dam broke. For the very first time all morning, the icy calm of the litigator cracked open, letting something furious bleed out. That is your whole pattern, Senator. You weren't just being sloppy. You weren't simply mixed up. Every single time you decided your narrative was worth more than the actual facts, you pulled the trigger. You did it to a private citizen. You did it to a federal judge. And you did it to every single working stiff who flipped on the news and blindly trusted the serious-looking guy in the expensive suit. Because surely, a guy that calm, a guy that precise, a guy who never once raised his voice, surely that guy wouldn't just invent things out of thin air. He let the blast wave hit. They fell for the costume. And you wore it like a guy who knew exactly what kind of juice it bought him. Johnson ripped to the next tab. The 21st of June 2023. The House of Representatives pulled a move it has only pulled on a tiny handful of people in a century. It censured you. 213 to 209. They made you stand down in the well of the chamber while the resolution was read straight to your face. You are just the third member to catch a censure this century. This wasn't some mean tweet. This wasn't a snarky press release. It was a hard vote. The exact institution you served for 20 years permanently stamped its name on one devastating conclusion that you had actively lied to the American people. Now, Adam Schiff launched his absolute heaviest punch of the day. He pivoted his body totally toward the cameras, locking onto the red recording lights by pure political muscle memory, and his famous voice rocked the room. That censure was a cheap partisan stunt And every honest soul in this room knows it. 213 members of your party. 0 from mine. Not a single one. There was absolutely no trial. There was zero evidence. It was purely a punishment for being highly effective against a guy your party has spent an entire decade desperately covering for, and this Schiff violently waved his hand at the binder, at Johnson, at the whole room. The real question the American people should be demanding to know is why a sitting Speaker of the House is carrying out the personal vendetta of a politician who has wanted my head on a spike since the day I held him accountable. I have not been charged with one single crime. You know exactly why? Because there is absolutely nothing to find. This is not a congressional hearing. This is a political hit job. And you damn well know it. This time, the counterstrike did major damage. The opposing side of the gallery fully woke up. Hands aggressively started to clap before people managed to stop themselves. A reporter who had been packing up his gear literally dropped his bag and sat back down. One of the younger panel members was violently nodding before he realized what he was doing and froze. For a long, incredibly dangerous minute, the gravity in the room shifted under Johnson. It tilted the exact way a courtroom tilts when the defense lawyer drops the one golden argument the jury has secretly been dying to hear. You could physically feel the momentum of the morning violently slide back toward the guy who had survived a dozen bloodbaths exactly like this one. Somewhere back in the press rows, a hushed voice muttered, "Hes not wrong about the vote." And it was completely true. He wasn't lying. The censure vote had been strictly party lines. He had never caught a criminal charge. For about 15 wild seconds, the most heavily roasted guy in that room was also, somehow, the most convincing guy in it. Johnson just let the tilt ride. He didn't fight the wave. He learned a long time ago that a lawyer who panics when the jury turns is a lawyer who loses the jury forever. So, he just sat there. He waited until the clapping had nowhere left to bleed out, until the heavy, suffocating silence dropped back over the crowd. Only then did he casually slide open a thin, separate folder. He dropped 3 distinct sheets of paper onto the desk, one by one, like a gambler laying out a royal flush. You called it a party line stunt. So, let me completely remove the political parties from the board. I have 3 names right here. I want you to point out which one of them is a partisan hack. He tapped the first sheet. Michael Horowitz, Inspector General, hired by a Democrat and kept on the payroll by a Republican. A strict, by-the-book career guy. He is the one who documented the 17 massive errors. Not me. He tapped the second sheet. The head judge of the surveillance court. A federal judge sworn to absolutely zero political party. She is the one who wrote that the Bureau actively lied to the court. Not me. He tapped the third sheet. John Durham, a special counsel whose entire job description was built around being fiercely independent. He chased your grand collusion ghost for 4 straight years and came back holding a bag of nothing. Not me. Johnson tapped the 3 sheets of paper into a neat, tight little stack. It was a brutal, exact copy of the nervous tick Schiff had been doing with his single piece of paper all morning. Nobody in that room missed the visual gut punch. You desperately want this to be about your political enemies attacking you, Senator, because that is the absolute only type of street fight you actually know how to win. But an inspector general does not wear a team jersey, a federal judge does not wear a team jersey, and the undeniable truth doesn't carry a voter registration card at all. That is the really annoying thing about the truth. It just sits quietly in a file box, being true, patiently waiting for somebody with a spine to finally read it out loud. The tilt in the room snapped back to dead flat. The scattered clapping stayed dead. Schiff desperately scrambled to find his rhythm again. The Inspector General also found that the investigation was properly predicated, which you conveniently gloss over. Properly predicated, Johnson nodded slowly, slicing right through him. And completely gutted by 17 massive, fatal errors. Both of those facts live in the exact same report, Senator. You just love to broadcast the first half to the cameras and bury the second half in a desk drawer. That is your whole magic act, isn't it? Half of a true thing, delivered with a totally straight face, has always been worth way more to you than the whole ugly truth. It always was. The senator didn't throw an answer back. His expensive pen started twitching again, running parallel to the edge of the document, constantly lining it up so it was geometrically perfect. Then Johnson went straight for the throat, short, brutal, rapid-fire strokes. It was the classic, inescapable rhythm of a brutal cross-examination, the exact same lethal rhythm Schiff himself had unleashed on 100 different victims. You dropped a memo calling that surveillance operation clean. Yes or no? In context, yes or no? Yes. The Inspector General officially flagged 17 fatal errors in it. Yes or no? That report is far more nuanced than just 17. Yes or no? A muscle aggressively jumped in Schiff's jaw. Yes. You told the whole country the collusion was sitting in plain sight. Yes or no? Yes. Mueller found absolutely zero criminal conspiracy. Yes or no? Dead silence hung in the room. Senator, yes or no? Yes. 4 yeses, Johnson said. And then he just shut his mouth completely. And that sudden, total stop was way worse than any grandstanding speech he could have delivered. That is the whole hearing, completely summarized in your own voice. I didn't have to shove a single word down your throat. This room just watched a guy answer yes 4 straight times to questions that completely vaporize his own life's work. The top Democrat on the panel, a politician who spent the whole morning with her arms locked defensively across her chest and her face frozen in careful neutrality, slowly reached forward. She shoved her own microphone an inch away from her face. She didn't even look at Schiff. She just stared dead at that small stack of 3 pages, and she said absolutely nothing. Schiff saw her do it. The entire room watched him watch her do it. He nervously snatched up his pen. He clicked it again. Then again. Way faster this time. You called this a hit job, Johnson said softly. Persecution? Pure revenge. Johnson laced his fingers on top of the heavy binder. And I will play entirely fair with you, because ripping that victim card has worked for you for a very long time, and plenty of people walked into this room this morning, totally ready to buy it. He stared straight into the TV lenses. So, let me make it crystal clear what I am not doing here. I am not here because of your political party. Not because of who you vote for, or who you pray to, or who you happen to be. Those are your standard issue shields, and you grabbed for them beautifully for 8 straight years. Every single time a guy got too close to your lies, you totally spun the narrative around and made him the headline. You trashed his motives, his financial backers, his church. You are literally the absolute finest practitioner of that specific defensive jujitsu that I have ever watched operate. Johnson leaned in close, his voice dropping low, and the whole gallery physically leaned in with him. But here is the massive hole in that move, Senator. It only works against raw opinions. You can spin a guy's motives. You can muddy up his intentions. But what you absolutely cannot do, with all the slick-talking talent in the world, is spin a raw, hard number. 17 is 17. No matter who is holding the gavel, a censure vote is a censure vote, and a sworn, binding legal document featuring your actual signature right at the bottom is the one single thing in this entire swamp that does not care, even a tiny bit, how good you look on a Sunday morning talk show. He let the brutal reality of it settle over the crowd. You trained this country that any guy who calls you a liar must automatically be the absolute worst villain in the room. And it worked like magic, because the guys who previously came after you were screaming partisans, and you could always flip the script and make them the story. But I didn't bring you my personal opinion today. I brought you your own damn paperwork. I am not the main story here. I never was. I am just the guy holding the file. Schiff spoke up then, and his voice was almost too quiet for the mic to even catch. There was zero political spin in it. No playing to the cheap seats. It was just one totally defeated man talking to the one opponent who hadn't blinked once. You think they will thank you for doing this? Schiff muttered. You think you've actually won something here? No, Johnson fired back. Nobody truly wins a bloodbath like this. I just think a true thing is finally about to get dragged out into the light. That is all I showed up for. There are files on every single person in this building. Schiff warned darkly. You get that? You. Of all people. I am dead sure there are files. Johnson didn't blink. Then the guys who spent their entire careers ripping open other people's files really should have kept their own files incredibly clean. You didn't, Senator. That is not my doing. That is just the piece of paper sitting right across the desk. Something deep inside the senator had finally started to shatter. And the craziest part about it was how insanely quiet the collapse actually was. There was no screaming fit, just a guy sitting in a pristine tailored suit, nervously nudging a single sheet of paper a quarter of an inch at a time, squaring it and re-squaring it against the sharp edge of the wood. Like getting the geometric angle exactly right was the only thing keeping his brain from exploding. His aide frantically leaned in and hissed something fast and desperate into his ear. For the first time all day, Schiff didn't even seem to register he was there. His eyes hadn't left the heavy black binder since the third tab was cracked open. Over by the back doors, a Capitol police officer who had stood totally relaxed all morning suddenly shifted his stance and locked his hands securely in front of him. Nobody ordered him to do it. He just naturally read the dangerous tension in the room, the way guys in that specific line of work eventually learn to do. Senator, Johnson said with total icy calm, you can stop arranging that page now. Schiff's hand froze dead. You have already read it. Haven't you? You read it the exact second my staff dumped this black binder on the desk. You've known since the very first tab exactly how this morning ends. That is exactly why you came out swinging wildly at my church and my home state and my voters in the first 4 minutes. Not because you actually believed a word of it, but because you desperately needed the room staring anywhere else but at this table. Pick it up, Johnson ordered. He wanted it read out loud. Schiff completely refused to touch it. So Johnson read it for him, and his tone carried absolutely zero professional courtesy now. It held only the flat, terrifying, and absolute patience of a judge reading off a guilty verdict. For 8 years, you stood tall in rooms exactly like this one, and you happily read other people's darkest secrets right into the official record. You were incredibly good at it. The careful, dramatic pauses, flashing the page up just right. He yanked one single page out of the binder and slapped it totally flat. This one is about you. So, let's treat it with the exact same level of brutal care you always handed out to everyone else. Johnson started reading. May of 2025, a massive, formal referral from the Federal Housing Agency straight to the Justice Department. The prime target of the investigation is you. The absolute core allegation is that for years, specifically from 2003 all the way through 2019, you deliberately faked bank and property records to scam better financial terms on a home. And the Financial Crimes Division over at Fannie Mae reached its own brutal conclusion. Their exact words: a sustained pattern of occupancy, misrepresentation, across 5 separate loans. Something completely physical drained right out of Schiff's posture as the words hit the air. It didn't happen all at once. It looked exactly like a tent collapsing when the main support pole gets violently kicked out, a slow, pathetic surrender of the shape of a man. He blindly grabbed his pen and just squeezed it, without clicking it. Johnson gave a hard nod to the giant digital screen mounted on the wall. 2 massive documents flashed up, side by side, blown up large enough for the guys in the very back row to read clearly. This first piece of paper is a mortgage filing on a massive home in Potomac, Maryland. It happens to be one of the richest suburbs in the entire country. On this document, under total penalty of perjury, you swore it was your primary residence, your real, everyday home, for years. He let the TV lenses eat up the image. And this second piece of paper is a homeowner's tax exemption on a luxury condo out in Burbank, California. Covering those exact same years, on this document you also swore, absolutely under oath, that it was your primary residence. He just let the 2 giant pages sit there, side by side, directly calling each other a lie in the senator's own handwriting. Think about what each of these lies actually buys you in the real world. The Maryland paperwork scores you the significantly cheaper bank loan because banks heavily reward the home a guy actually lives in. The California paperwork scores you a massive break on your property taxes because the state rewards that exact same thing. So, you aggressively double-dipped the homeowner's discount in 2 completely different states, at the exact same time, for the exact same years, by swearing 2 completely different things to 2 completely different governments. Johnson locked onto him. There is no version of reality where both of those statements are legally true. One of those signatures is a documented criminal lie. Senator, you simply got to pick and choose which government you were lying to, depending entirely on which one was writing you the massive check. He turned his whole body to face Schiff directly, and this was not just one confusing form filled out on one distracted afternoon. This is the part that actually kills you. 5 loans, Senator, 5 of them. The exact same fake fact, carried forward, year after year, refinanced, and then refinanced again, each time with your fresh ink stamped right at the bottom of it. Fannie Mae officially branded it a sustained pattern. Sustained. That is an incredibly dangerous word, and their lawyers picked it on purpose. It means this was not an accidental slip of the pen. It was a deliberate, calculated business practice. He let the giant documents burn on the screen just a moment longer. Now, here is the part I want every hard-working family listening right now to fully digest. Because this is the entire scandal cooked down to one sentence. When you swear a house is the place you actually live, the bank charges you a hell of a lot less money, cheaper interest rates, kinder terms. So, every single time you signed a paper claiming you lived full-time in that giant Maryland mansion, you jammed your hand into the system and grabbed the better financial deal that an honest guy living 2 streets over couldn't touch. Because he only had the one house, and he told the absolute truth about it. His volume didn't spike. It just got infinitely harder and way quieter. The room practically had to stand up to hear it. Picture the guy living 2 streets over from that condo in Burbank. He owns one house. He told the absolute truth about it because it never once crossed his mind to try anything else. He pays the brutal, punishing rate an honest man is forced to pay. He is awake at 500 a.m. He is totally exhausted. He is stretching a single paycheck across a month that is always 3 days too long. And every single April, He pays exactly what he owes, because that is what honest people are forced to do. Johnson let the picture sink deep in. That guy listened to you, Senator, for 30 long years. He listened to you on his TV screen, in that calm, incredibly serious voice of yours. Lecture him endlessly about fairness, about the rich elite rigging the rules, about paying your absolute fair share. He let the silence hang thick, and the entire time you were preaching to him, you were doing the exact illegal thing you were warning him about. You owned 2 houses, and you swore under oath that each one was your only home, just so you could pay less money than he paid. You weren't bravely fighting the corrupt people who rig the system. You were one of them. You just happened to have a much better speaking voice and a nicer tailored suit, and you ruthlessly used both of those weapons to make a working guy trust you while you robbed the damn system. He slammed the paper down directly between them. 2 primary residences, both sworn under oath, both filed right in plain sight. The kill shot landed. The gallery made a collective, sick sound. It was low, guttural, and totally involuntary. It was the exact noise a crowd makes when it finally sees the entire ugly shape of a monster revealed. And yet, somehow, Schiff scraped up one absolute last breath of fight left in his lungs. I served a state 3,000 miles away from where my family lived for years, he stammered, and his tone was way steadier than it had any right to be. Occupancy designations are not simple for a man in that highly complex position. They are subjective judgment calls. Accountants make them. Reasonable people can land in different places. This is a referral, Mr. Speaker, from a political appointee, dressed up to look like a massive crime. I have not been charged. I have not been charged because there is absolutely nothing here but complicated paperwork and a former president's petty personal grudge. For a split second, the defense almost took its old, familiar shape. A loyal staffer finally exhaled hard. The desperate excuse was almost a passable smokescreen. It would be a completely fine answer, Senator, if it were just one form, in 1 year, as one honest mix-up. Johnson still didn't raise his voice. But you didn't legally list that Maryland house as a second home until the year 2020, the exact year the reporters started sniffing around. From 2003 until somebody finally looked into it, that mansion was your absolute only home on paper, completely under oath. For 17 years, he let that devastating number drop all over again, the exact same number, swinging right back around to smash him in the teeth. And the very second a journalist started quietly asking around, it miraculously became your second home. An honest mistake does not sit comfortably for 17 straight years and then magically correct itself the exact week the press shows up at your front door. That is not an accountant's judgment call. That is a guilty man desperately hosing down the crime scene. He straightened his spine. He let the room freeze perfectly still, and then he asked the final question, totally flat. The way a killer trial lawyer asks the ultimate question he already knows the brutal answer to. It is a very simple one, Senator. The exact kind you used to jam down the throats of 100 terrified witnesses. Is the massive home in Maryland your primary residence? Yes or no? Schiff's mouth hung open. Then it snapped shut. Is the condo in California your primary residence? Yes or no? It absolutely cannot be both. It can only be one. You swore under penalty of perjury it was both. So, pick one right now. Live in front of these cameras. Whichever one you pick, the other sworn oath instantly becomes a documented criminal lie on its face. Which one is the absolute lie, Senator? Maryland or California? Schiff stared down at the paper, then up at the giant screen, then at absolutely nothing at all, and he gave absolutely zero answer. He didn't answer because there was no possible string of words that didn't instantly end his career. He knew it. And every single soul sitting in that room knew it. And so, Adam Schiff launched the pivot. It was pure, desperate reflex. The exact defensive maneuver that had saved his hide 100 times before. He executed the famous quarter turn toward the television cameras, and he dug deep down for that famous, booming broadcast voice. The real question, the American people. The word violently chopped off. It wasn't interrupted by anyone else. It just cut out totally cold, exactly like a power cord violently ripped right out of a wall socket. He swallowed hard. The microphone, cranked up extremely high, caught the dry, sickening click of total panic in his throat. The real question, he desperately tried again, and this time, the mighty broadcast baritone, the smooth, godlike instrument that had narrated the country's worst political nightmares for 8 straight years, thinned out into something reedy, small, and totally pathetic. It completely shattered on the second word. And it died. His trembling hand shot out toward his pen. The cap clicked furiously now. 4 times, 5 times, a frantic, pathetic little noise echoing inside an enormously silent room. His other hand dragged the single sheet of paper square against the table edge again, but his fingers simply could not be forced to hold still. The real, absolutely nothing came out. The slickest, most articulate guy in Washington, D.C., sitting in front of every major camera in the entire country, with his own damning signature glowing on a massive screen right behind his head, opened his mouth and produced absolutely zero sound at all. He tried one absolute final time, but there were no actual words left in the tank. Just a ragged, ugly breath that caught halfway up his throat and shrank into something infinitely smaller. He reached for the glass of water sitting at his elbow, and his hand was violently shaking so bad that the ice forcefully hammered against the side of the glass. It made a thin, bright, humiliating noise in the dead silence. He slowly set it back down without taking a single drop. The pen was lying flat on the desk now. He had completely stopped clicking it. He had stopped squaring the piece of paper. His hands had simply quit working, the way a broken machine finally quits when it fully understands there is absolutely nothing left to do. And nobody moved a single muscle to fill the dead air. That was the mercy and the absolute cruelty of the moment, all smashed into one. A loud heckler would have handed him something to bravely fight against. A slamming gavel would have handed him a protective shield. Instead, the entire room simply waited. 200 people holding perfectly frozen, letting the suffocating silence belong entirely, 100%. To the guy who had spent his entire life making sure silence never could. On the Democratic side of the panel, a loyal member awkwardly stared down at her own hands. Up in the gallery, a woman who had proudly flashed a campaign button supporting him slowly turned it face down against her coat, without even seeming to process she was doing it. You are watching a guy who talked for a living completely lose the physical ability to finish a sentence. Mike Johnson finally stood up. It was the only time he stood up to his full height all day. The entire room seemed to magnetically pull around him. And when he spoke, he did not speak to Schiff at all. He spoke directly past him. He spoke to the cameras. He spoke to the exhausted guy living 2 streets over from that condo in Burbank. He spoke to everyone in the country who had ever been told to sit down, shut up, and blindly trust the serious voice on TV. You blew 8 years on every single screen in America, aggressively hunting a massive liar, Johnson stated flatly. You built your entire public life on it. Every panel, every prime-time hour, every grave, terrifying warning to the country about the massive fraud you swore was sitting right out in the open. He stared down. And here is the absolute sick tragedy of it, Senator. You were dead right. The massive fraud was in plain sight the entire time. You were just completely wrong all those years about exactly where it was sitting. He lifted the heavy binder, the full, crushing weight of every single tab inside it, and he stared down at the broken guy across the table who could no longer speak. The fraud you chased for 8 long years was you. He didn't even have to shout it. He didn't need to. The devastating line went out over the broadcast wires, the exact way a struck bell rings out over a dead field. And somewhere deep in the silence that followed, one single person up in the gallery started to slowly clap. Then they instantly stopped, because it did not feel like a performance you applauded for. It felt like a fatal car wreck you had just witnessed. The gavel finally slammed down, though nobody could remember afterward exactly when the chairman had reached for it. This panel, the chairman announced, his voice totally shaking, will officially refer the residency matter to the appropriate legal authorities and the whistleblower contact issue to the Ethics Committee. We stand in recess. It was the dry, cowardly language of political procedure. The empty word suits use when they want to be incredibly careful, but in that absolutely silent room, it landed exactly like a life sentence. Schiff's lawyer was hovering at his shoulder now. He shoved a firm hand on his arm. It was the universal, desperate posture of a legal counsel begging a client to stop talking. Except the client had already stopped. There was absolutely zero fight left inside him to stop. Schiff reached out for the single page, seemed to have no earthly idea what to do with it, and blankly dropped it back down exactly where it had been. All around the room, the morning started to come apart in small, undramatic, depressing motions, which was somehow way worse than total chaos. The top Democrat silently grabbed her papers and walked out without saying one single word to him. Her staff quickly jumped up and followed her out. The empty seats on her side of the aisle simply stayed empty. One by one, members of his own political party suddenly found massive, urgent reasons to be somewhere else entirely. And the few who actually stayed glued their eyes strictly to their papers. Because there is a very particular kind of political cowardice that looks exactly like taking careful notes. The gallery that had laughed so easily in the first 4 minutes filed out in total, dead silence now. Heads down, thumbs moving furiously, passing the viral kill shot to people who would pass it to other people, until, by lunchtime, there would be absolutely nobody left in the country who hadn't seen the power cord forcefully yanked from the wall. Those hardcore activists who froze outside before dawn just to watch a conservative speaker get gutted, they bolted without even glancing at the witness table. The journalists who had confidently marched in to write one specific hit piece were frantically rewriting a completely different bloodbath in real time. And the reporters who had bailed out early? They were simply the smart ones who had read the writing on the wall first. A staffer standing near the press table whispered it, barely under his breath. He never denied it. He said it the way a guy says a thing the exact instant. He fully comprehends the horror of it. At the very end, he never once said it wasn't true. He just couldn't finish the damn sentence. An older reporter standing right next to him, a veteran who had covered the chaotic impeachment circus from a front-row seat, watched the ruined senator slowly grab his winter coat. The veteran said nothing for a long while. Then, speaking quietly, as much to himself as to anyone else, he muttered, "He used to do this exact thing to people. The thin folder, the patient little questions, the heavy weight of the room. I watched him run a dozen witnesses straight into the ground that exact same way." He shook his head slowly. Strange thing. Watching a guy violently drown in his own damn pool. And the cell phones absolutely refused to stop vibrating on the screens of the people rushing out of the room. The disastrous morning was already eating away the senator's entire afternoon. An evening television spot was instantly yanked by a single, panicked line from a news network that had happily booked him for years. A drafted statement from a loyal colleague who had fiercely defended him on a dozen Sunday shows now completely changed tune, saying only that the senator should be given the chance to legally answer the questions, which is the exact cowardly spin politicians use when they have decided to permanently stop throwing you lifelines. It wasn't a loud stampede, nothing nearly as loud as that, just the quiet, highly practiced motion of a ruthless town that always knows, long before anyone publicly announces it, exactly which way a bloody thing has tipped, and it steps back from the cliff's edge just in time. Johnson was already quietly shoving the heavy binder into a plain leather bag. He hadn't smiled a single time all morning, and he absolutely wasn't smiling now. A young aide leaned in and excitedly murmured that the video clip of the final exchange was ripping across the internet faster than anything the office had ever posted before. Faster than they could even track. The speaker just nodded, the exact way an exhausted man nods at the weather. But right before he fully left the room, he stopped right at the edge of the dais. He turned back to the half-emptied room, and he delivered the one final bullet the gallery would carry home and repeat long after they forgot any of the legal documents. I want to say one final thing to the people watching at home, because they are the ones this was really for. His voice was totally quiet again. The powerful litigator's voice, the specific tone that forces a loud, chaotic room to freeze perfectly still. For a very long time, a ton of you have had the sickening feeling that the truth turned into a kind of cheap magic act. That the serious people on your television screens decided that facts were just flexible opinions worn by whoever had the most political muscle that week. That a guy, if he was just calm enough and clever enough and wore the right expensive suit, could say absolutely anything he wanted and never, ever have to pay the tab for it. He stared directly at the empty wooden witness chair. That feeling is the exact thing I came into this room to slaughter this morning. Not a man. A habit. The toxic habit of believing the costume is the exact same thing as the character. It absolutely isn't. A federal judge is not a costume. A legal signature under penalty of perjury is not a stage performance. 17 massive errors are not a simple difference of opinion, and no guy, no matter how gifted he thinks he is, gets to spend his entire life calling other people frauds and then act shocked the morning somebody finally kicks open his own file. He stopped, and his eyes swept over the half-empty room, over the recording cameras, over the invisible space where the country was watching from the other side of the lens, and to the hard-working folks at home who felt for years like they were literally losing their damn minds. The people who watched the serious men say a fake thing with such total, arrogant certainty and felt deep in their gut it wasn't right, and then got told they were the crazy ones for ever doubting it. The conspiracy theorists, the deplorables, the people deemed too stupid to understand. He stared dead into the lens. I want you to hear something very clearly this morning. Your gut was not broken. It was working perfectly fine the entire time. You were being aggressively lied to by men who were very, very good at lying. And the only thing you ever got wrong was thinking you must be the crazy one. Because, surely, a guy that remarkably calm wouldn't just make it all up. He let that sink deep in. He totally would. He absolutely did. And it took 8 agonizing years and a heavy binder full of his own legal signatures to finally prove what a whole lot of you already knew in your gut. He lifted the leather bag. The file was sitting there the whole damn time. He said, all anybody ever had to do was read it out loud. For a long second, nobody answered him, because there was literally nobody left on the other side of the room to answer. The guy who had always demanded the final word, the guy who had built an entire empire on having it, sat frozen with his lawyer's hand on his arm and said absolutely nothing. And that nothing was the absolute loudest thing in the entire building. He didn't even look up when the speaker spoke. He just stared at the piece of paper squared against the table edge as if it might magically still be made to say something other than what it said. And then, unlike so many suits in so many of these grand rooms, Mike Johnson made absolutely zero grand show of his exit. He simply walked out the main doors, stepping into the ordinary noise of an ordinary Tuesday in the Longworth building, and was completely gone before the stunned room had even finished processing what it had just watched. Behind him, on the wooden witness table, a single sheet of paper sat perfectly squared against the edge, and an expensive fountain pen lay right beside it, capped and perfectly still. By 2:00 p.m., the ruined senator's office pushed out a frantic written statement. It used all the familiar, tired buzzwords, baseless, politically motivated, a revenge operation by an administration that had wanted him gone for a decade. It was a slick statement. It was professionally written, and it absolutely would have worked, the exact same way every statement before it had worked, except for one massive, fatal problem. The country had already watched the tape, and on that tape, the most articulate talker in American politics couldn't spit out a single word of it. The typed words on a press release couldn't magically erase the devastating silence on the screen. By evening, the clip of the failed pivot had been played more times than any piece of committee footage in the building's entire history. People who couldn't have named a single member of the panel watched a powerful guy reach for a sentence 3 times and completely choke on it, and they understood the guilt instantly. Cable news coverage split predictably along the old partisan lines. His desperate defenders insisted, technically correctly, that the residency question was legally unproven in a court of law, and the timing was highly suspicious. His critics mercilessly ran the side-by-side tax documents on an endless loop. But even the loudest defenders kept their sentences noticeably short that night, and not a single one of them dared to replay the part of the tape where he actually tried to speak. In 1,000 living rooms across the country, everyday people who had spent years being called crazy paranoids for not trusting the guy simply watched the clip in total silence. They said nothing. They just felt the particular, exhausting quiet of being proven absolutely right, way too late to actually enjoy it. In a quiet house, in another state, a guy named Carter Page, who had been unlawfully hunted 4 times over and never charged with a single crime, watched the news segment about the 17 errors all the way through, twice. Then he shut the television off and sat for a long while in the kind of heavy silence that never makes the evening news. On the legal channels, former prosecutors argued late into the night over whether a sworn occupancy form actually rose to a chargeable criminal offense, reminding their audiences accurately that no legal charge had been officially brought against anyone yet. It was a fair legal point, and it absolutely did not matter one bit. What permanently broke inside that hearing room was never going to be settled inside a courtroom anyway. It was the powerful spell a country can eventually be argued out of. But a verdict? A verdict cannot be argued out of a thing a country watched happen with its own 2 eyes. The speaker gave 0 interviews and posted absolutely nothing online. When a frantic reporter finally caught him in a hallway late that night and asked what he had hoped to accomplish, he said only that a guy had owned 2 houses and had sworn under oath that each one was his absolute only home and that everything else had simply followed from there. 2 houses, 2 oaths, 1 undeniable truth. That is the whole story. And that is exactly what happens when the file finally gets opened.